The Clear Signal with Steve Visscher is produced in the first instance as a radio show, and it's aired on stations around Australia. Due to music licensing restrictions, copyright-protected music tracks in this podcast edition have either been replaced with royalty-free alternatives or removed entirely.
The Clear Signal with Steve Visscher.
Well, hi everyone. Welcome back to the show. It's great to have you with us on this week's edition of The Clear Signal. You can find us at clearsignal.com.au, of course, and you can shoot me an email anytime you like at steve@clearsignal.com.au. I want to talk to you this week about magazines. Do you still read them? I mean, there's a lot of magazines that are still around, but many have perished these days, along, I might say, with newspapers. Newspapers seem to be going by the wayside as well in some parts of the world as the digital era just grinds on. And, of course, we're in what we might term the iPad era. And, of course, if some of the magazines that you may have read in times past, well, you may have to go online to do that now, which, may suit a lot of people in this modern age. But for others, well, I think people just like to have the idea of a nice glossy magazine in their hand, something they can carry around and read at their leisure. And I suppose not have to worry about the battery running out in your iPad or your Android device or whatever. So with so many print magazines and print publications really under a lot of pressure these days, it's always interesting to see when a new one pops up. And this week we're going to be talking to a Melbourne-based publisher who's just started up a new magazine called Jimmy Hornet. Her name's Anthea Palmer, and we'll be talking to her in just a few minutes about what that magazine's about and how it comes about. And she's actually got a really interesting way of funding it too. She doesn't actually take any advertising, which is an interesting way of doing things in this highly commercial time. Also, we're talking career changes this week in the second half of the show. Coming up a little later, we're going to be talking about changing careers, perhaps into the transport industry, and particularly around trains. Now, I can tell you, if you've looked on my bio on the website, you'll know that I've got quite a background in that particular part of the transport industry, but it's always a profession, driving trains, that people seem to find attractive. A lot of people might get grumpy at your average train when it runs late, but a lot of people seem to be fascinated by the concept of getting behind the controls and wondering what that's all about. Have you ever thought what that's all about? Have you ever wondered what it would be like to get behind the controls of several hundred tons of machinery like that and run it around and make a pretty good career out of it? Hamish Withington is a highly experienced locomotive driver. He's driven trains in many parts of Australia, and he's also got quite a background in training and assessment, and he's just recently started up a program called Pre-Train, which will help people make decisions about careers within the rail industry, and talks about what people can expect, and also helps people to prepare for interviews if you've decided to go through that process and go down the path of becoming a train driver. It's actually quite an involved process, and hopefully something you'll find quite interesting. So that's a little bit later in the show. We'll be talking to Anthea Palmer from Jimmy Hornet magazine in just a few minutes, right here on The Clear Signal. You're listening to The Clear Signal with me, Steve Visscher. It's great to have you along. And as we mentioned at the top of the show, we're talking magazines this week. Here in Melbourne, there's a new publication that's come out just recently called Jimmy Hornet magazine. Its publisher is Anthea Palmer, and she joins us on the line now. G'day, Anthea.
Thank you for having me.
Look, congratulations on the magazine. It's really interesting, and it's something really different. And I think in an era now where print magazines and print journalism really in general is really struggling, I think it's a really brave decision to come out and actually bring something new into the market.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I've always loved magazines. I used to buy them, particularly when I was a teenager. And I just found that there wasn't much around in the market that I wanted to buy anymore. And I love print as well, so I just thought I would give it a go.
Oh, it's fantastic. Now, there's a few issues that come out of this, but before we go any further, the name Jimmy Hornet, can we talk about how that came about?
Sure. It is a long story, but I'll try to make it short. I had a venue. I've had 3 live music venues in my life, but the first one I had in Melbourne was called the Chandelier Room because it was an old factory that we glammed up with a lot of sparkle and chandeliers. And I moved to China, and I lived in China for 5 years, and I went there to start a tour for musicians and hopefully open a venue, which I did. And I had, of course, logos and website and everything for the Chandelier Room, and had hoped that I would just use that in China. And when I got there, I realized the city I was living in was the world's largest manufacturing hub for lighting. And
Wow.
fortunately, I got some advice from locals who said, you can't have anything to do with lighting because people just won't understand. So we had to find another name, and we had to find something that worked in Chinese, that the characters are very important for business. And yes, anyway, it took a long, long time. And eventually I came up with the name Jimmy Hornet, and the Chinese loved it and said it had great characters that they could use. Jimmy in Chinese is a very well-known Western name. And then Hornet, they came up with the characters Rei Feng, which means lucky bee, but actually the first character also means musical note. So they were very happy with all the characters, with the name, and so we went with that. So I had that name in China for 5 years. So when I came back, I just decided I would, keep the branding and use the name in English. So that's where it came from.
That's fantastic. I mean, it's something that really sticks out about the magazine. One thing I really notice about it too is your choice of paper stock. It's a really thick, glossy sort of style of paper, which is something, it's not like a throwaway magazine, is it? It kind of reminds me of some of the table magazines from some of the big mastheads you might have seen perhaps in the 70s or 80s, perhaps in anything before the iPad era came in.
Yeah, I really wanted it to be high quality, and I wanted it to be something that people keep around, either keep or collect or pass on to friends, rather than something that's a bit flimsy and easy to get lost or get chucked. So yes, having good quality stock and having a nice glossy finish was important to me. I get a bit of stick online about the fact that I'm using paper, but I explain that it is really created to be kept, not, to be just thrown away. So hopefully that helps with the naysayers.
Well, I think there's something really to be said for that, having the feel of a good quality magazine. I'm quite a user these days of ebooks, but when I talk to some people, they say they just can't get used to an ebook because they like to have the feel of a paperback in their hand while they're reading. And I imagine that's kind of the same theory here.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I'm all about paper. And I think glossy, when you buy it, I think it sort of feels a bit decadent. It sort of feels like you're treating yourself a bit instead of just a standard stock. So I hope that's the end result.
So let's talk a bit about the focus of the magazine. Is talking a bit about, would you describe it as pop culture that you talk about in the main, or is it much more broad than that?
Well, I guess my sort of mantra for the magazine is that I try to shine a light on the bravely creative. So really, I think it's about trying to give love to the people that are trying to do something creative that may not get attention otherwise. They might not have been lucky enough to have an influencer, pick them up and give them some joy. There's so many people doing amazingly quirky, creative things. And so I really love to just give them a go and sort of highlight what they're doing. Around that, there is some pop culture, and the two things sort of overlap a lot in the magazine. But yeah, really it is about, just giving a bit of love and a bit of joy to those people that really put their heart and soul into a creative project.
So when you're having journalists come in, have you got sort of a stable of regular journalists that are submitting articles to you, or is it open to freelance? How do you sort of organise that?
Yeah, mainly just freelancers. Initially, I was doing a lot of the writing myself in Volume 1 and with a few sort of guest writers. Now, as the magazine's grown a bit, I receive a lot of submissions from writers wanting to contribute, which is terrific. So as we go, there'll be some ongoing continual writers, but also I like the idea of, new voices. A lot of the writers have their own contacts and their own creative projects that they'd like to write about or feature. And so I think that just adds to, the uniqueness of the magazine.
Another thing that really interests me about Jimmy Hornet magazine is your funding model. Now, there's no advertising in this magazine. And my background, of course, in journalism comes through podcasting. And a lot of people in podcasting like to come in and think they're going to get advertisers. But there is a theory that goes around that if you have advertisers, then your audience becomes the product. So the alternative to that is to use a value for value model, if you like, and have people really buy into it. That's an interesting concept that you've gone with here. There's no advertisers there. You're totally crowdfunding this.
Yeah, well, when you say crowdfunding, I haven't done any crowdfunding per se. It's really just I'm reliant on sales to keep the magazine going.
A subscription model, I should have said. Yeah.
Yeah, just, now when you say crowdfunding, people think that you've sort of asked for upfront or donations.
Donations, yeah. No, I should clarify that. It's a subscription model, but the no advertising it's very brave actually to go out and do it that way, particularly when you're starting up. But it's a really great concept.
Oh, thank you. Well, again, part of the reason for that is when you buy magazines these days, I mean, pretty much all of them, they're just full of adverts. And often the adverts have nothing to do with, the meaning or the goal of the magazines in question. It's just all about getting the advertising dollar. And I find that really disappointing with magazines. And there's a few magazines I really love that started off with no or very few adverts. And then before you know it, they're sort of full of advertising dollar. So for as long as I can, I will try to keep it ad-free. We've never had one advert yet, and we've never had anybody pay for placement. Another issue for me was a lot of the magazines these days, and even anything editorial, is paid for. And so I think the concept of curation for curation's sake is sort of gone out of the window, and it's really just about who's paying for pages. I want to stay away from that as much and for as long as I possibly can.
We're talking this week to Anthea Palmer from Jimmy Hornet magazine, and we're talking about the idea of how you fund something new, particularly in media. Interesting. I think people would actually be surprised, Anthea, if they knew how much content that's served up to them these days as journalism is actually, as you say, a lot of it's paid for placement.
Yes. I mean, honestly, most of it, and it sort of horrifies me. It really does. There's no sort of pure sort of curation anymore. And, I won't name magazines because I don't want to diss anybody. But, unfortunately, that's the way the cookie crumbles these days.
And you sort of notice, I mean, my background in journalism also is through aviation. I noticed a lot of the mastheads that I used to really like actually, in print magazines and aviation have sort of either disappeared or gone online. And if they've gone online, they've become nothing really more than clickbait, as you say, serving up ads. So it's really great to see that you've sort of moved away from that model, and I really hope it works well for you. A couple of stories that stick out to you. There's so many stories in this magazine that I've got in front of me that really stick out. Is there one that sort of jumps out at you right at the moment that, people would really be interested to go and grab a copy and have a read?
Well, Volume 5's about to come out. I mean, as you say, so many fabulous people doing terrific things. Volume 5 will be released on the 1st of May. And, I always think each new one is the best one yet, but I really do think this will be the best one because, we do have quite a collection of different writers now and, quite a selection of creatives to put in there. But I think I came across an artist, called Valley Myers, who listeners may know of. I didn't. I had never heard of Valley Myers before. She's no longer with us. She passed away, I think, in the late 90s. I think 1998. But she was a prolific painter. She was a dancer. She was born in Sydney, but then moved to Melbourne, spent a lot of time in Europe, in New York, and her life story and just, the incredible creativity that just oozed out of this woman, I found quite astounding and so surprised that people here didn't know who she was. So we've got a big feature on her in Volume 5, and I think she's just fascinating, and I hope that it'll, really introduce her to a lot of Australians that had never heard of her before. Australia, we're very good at this tall poppy syndrome, where, everybody that's made it overseas is more important than anybody that's made it here. And unfortunately, she was very famous overseas and sort of had a cult following. And yet in Australia, very few people know of her.
You mentioned before that you lived in China and you spent quite some time there. Do you think this is the sort of magazine that, I mean, that's a huge market over there. Do you think it would translate into a Chinese language version somewhere down the track?
Oh, look, the work involved in having a magazine translated and then also the red tape in having it released in China because, you know, everything there has to be checked. I'm not sure that a lot of our articles would pass the Chinese scrutiny.
No.
So probably not, but we are getting ready to release in the US, which obviously is a much bigger market. And I, you know, that seems exciting at the moment. Let's see how it goes. I think China would be fairly difficult, but let's hope the US helps sales and helps me keep going.
That'd be fantastic. I wish you every success, Anthea Palmer, the publisher of Jimmy Hornet magazine. You can find that at jimmyhornet.com. And, folks, I'd really encourage you to get over there and buy a copy and support this publication. Anthea, thanks so much for your time today.
Oh, my pleasure, Steve. Thank you so much.
And look, I can tell you from experience, it's no small endeavour to go into any media market these days to set up a new endeavour of any type. So we really do wish Anthea well with that, and I certainly hope listeners will get out and support her. Coming up after the break, we'll be talking to Hamish Withington from Pre-Train, and we'll be talking about the interesting career moves that some people are making into transport and particularly into the art of train driving. So stick around, folks. We'll be right back.
You're listening to The Clear Signal.
Australia's transport industry is, well, frankly, it's huge. And, you know, there's a lot of pretty cool career choices around in the various transport industries. And on many levels, you know, they kind of tend to hold a bit of a fascination with people. And one branch, if you like, of that vast sector is rail, and more specifically, the trains themselves. It's a career path that tends to attract people from many other professions, interestingly enough. And some of them are looking for that big career change, the big tree change kind of thing. And others have just got a fascination for trains and are really, a desire to get out there and get that job and live the dream. But the process to get into train driving is actually a pretty competitive one. And the training, if you do make it in, it's actually a lot more involved than you might think. And so, like anything, I guess, well, preparation's the key. And my next guest has set up a process to help those looking at the industry to do just that. Hamish Withington is the creator of Pre-Train, and he's a highly experienced train driver in his own right as well. Hamish, welcome.
Thanks, Steve. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, great to have you with us, mate. Now, we're going to talk today a bit about train driving. And, of course, you and I would have a vested interest in that because we both work in that industry when we're not doing radio, of course. And but what we thought we'd do today is talk a bit about the recruiting process because, Hamish, it's quite an involved process depending on what types of jobs you're interested in. So let's start with that. You know, a lot of people would think of their passenger trains, but that's not the only type of train driving there is.
Absolutely. And look, this is something I encountered when I became a trainee driver myself many, many years ago. The old state-based systems, if you wanted to be a train driver, say in New South Wales, you would end up working for the New South Wales Government Railway. But with deregulation, privatisation, all these other things now, over the last 30-odd years, it's complicated the market, but it's also created opportunity as well. So essentially, if you want to drive trains these days, there's probably 4 different sectors of the industry. If we're going to get sort of fairly neat and tidy with it, there's probably 4 different. There's the 2 streams of passenger trains and there's 2 different streams of freight and bulk trains. So I divide them into suburban passenger trains, regional passenger trains, general freight, and heavy haul trains. So your coal trains, your iron ore, bulk mineral trains, and so on in that latter group. So we've divided into 4 sectors of the industry to sort of provide a little bit of guidance and clarity around the opportunities out there.
You know, I suppose if we start off with passenger rail, of course, well, there's 2 different sectors of that. Now, a lot of people live in cities, particularly here on the East Coast. There's quite extensive suburban passenger rail operations, but also more widely, there's, intra-city, there's regional services as well, and they're all done by different operators.
Absolutely. And look, once upon a time, if you wanted to, say, drive regional or long-distance passenger trains in New South Wales, the old way you would go is you would have to be a suburban driver effectively first or a freight driver and then go sideways across into that. But the exciting thing that I've noticed in the last probably 18 months, I've seen regional passenger train operations or companies calling directly for trainees straight into those particular jobs, which was not the done thing once upon a time, but it's starting to open up now. So regional passenger trains, all across the East Coast, we've got those. But suburban trains, definitely Brisbane, Sydney, Melbourne on the East Coast, Adelaide, and Perth in Western Australia, all lots of opportunities, and lots of great ways to get into the industry, depending on what you're prepared to do and what you want out of the job.
Because if you look at passenger operations and suburban operations, more specifically, and compare those to freight work, those are very different types of train driving and very different lifestyles.
Absolutely, and all the different types. And one thing I'm at pains to, present to people who do my programs who want to become a train driver is to look at the benefits and drawbacks of each different sector and then work out which sector is the one that they want to invest their time and energy in. And I call that aligning expectations. So you're absolutely right, Steve. I guess for me, look, I've done suburban, I've done regional, I've done freight, I've done my share of heavy haul as well. So I've been across all those four and also managed and did recruitment drives and was a hiring manager for trainees in bulk and freight some years ago. So I'm quite across the four different ones. But in each sector of the industry, particularly in my first program, which is called Rail Ready, it's the first of the three packages in pre-train. I try to explain, like, suburban trains have these particular benefits. They have these potential drawbacks. Regional passenger has these particular benefits and drawbacks. And it's the same for general freight and for bulk. And I try to present them very evenly and leave it open to the viewer to decide, okay, which one's is the one that's going to work for me.
Well, let's talk about some of the pros. I mean, anybody you bump into at a barbecue or talk to you and say, gee whiz, you're a train driver, you must be in a good wicket there. Well, yes, train drivers do make good money, but there's good reasons for that.
Absolutely. Look, if we're going to talk benefits generally right across all four sectors, the very first benefit I like to sort of promote to people is the fact you're paid to learn. And I think this can never, ever be downplayed or underestimated. I mean, for example, if you want to learn to be a pilot, if you want to go into aviation, you've got to go and spend your own money to do your private pilot's license and then, get some instrument ratings and maybe an instructor's rating. And you are spending a fortune of your own money to learn to fly the aircraft, get your first job in the industry, build up your hours and so on. Railways will pay you to learn. And typically I've sort of suggested to people it's around about 50+% of a full-time driver's base wage that you get paid while they teach you how to drive these things. And that is a huge, huge benefit right off the starting blocks.
And let's talk about some of the, before we go into some of the, the drawbacks or some of the things people should think about when they're coming in, because a lot of people say, wow, that'd be great. Some people don't like doing shift work, but it can be a flexible job, but people need to be aware that, that does also mean working across a 7-day-a-week cycle, not just a 9 to 5, Monday, Friday type of thing.
This is exactly on the money, Steve. You're already pretty well across it there. But I think it's the perceptions that people hold about what the train driving life is like. I think sometimes people sort of they have an image in their head of someone hanging out the window of the train with their hand on the throttle on a beautiful sunny day somewhere between 9 and 5 on a Monday to Friday, and then we've finished playing trains for the day and we all go home when it's dinner time. And it's one of the things I'm very keen to do is bust that fantasy. It is about shift work, and shift work within itself has drawbacks and benefits. So I guess if you're a person who's very, very hung up on your social or family life and you must be there for every one of your kids' games of footy, or you've got to be going to every barbecue you get invited to by your other half and their thing and things like that, then the shift work can be a real challenge. But I guess if you're prepared to do the shift work, I found, and one of the things I promote about it is that there are benefits in doing shift work. For example, I've never been a Monday to Friday 8 to 5 person. It bores me. I find routine very, very boring. I love the variety of the different times I'm going to work, and more importantly, the different times I'm actually at home available to do things in different hours. Like banks are open and different businesses are open through the week, and you might finish a shift at 3 a.m. in the morning. You get home, you have a sleep till 8 or 9 in the morning, and then you've got sort of probably a good 4-hour window or more of usable time during the day, during business hours, to actually go and do things and get things done and in your own life. So, they may sound like little things, but I tell you what, day to day, I'm back doing full-time shift work, train driving myself now in a heavy haul operation. And I'm absolutely loving the variety of that. So it's, again, throughout the pre-train modules, I like to present both sides of these views and allow the student to determine what they think is a good fit for them personally.
And something I've always thought too, I want to get on in a minute and talk about some of the training requirements, but one of the other things I think too about this type of work is you kind of need to enjoy working by yourself. It's a very solitary job, or it can be.
Yeah, look, it can be, and that's another point I raise in one of. There's actually a whole a small lesson on that. There is still a remarkable amount of two-driver working across Australia in different sectors. I mean, for you and I, we did time with Metro, so suburban trains, you're in the cab on your own. Your regional passenger trains, a lot of them, you're in the cab on your own, and some of the bulk and heavy haul and general freight, where there's certain systems in place, that is also on your own. But outside of that, I mean, I'm working in a depot now where it's a two-driver operation, and additionally, we've got a whole bunch of trainees. So quite often there's three of us in the cab. So if that's something that's actually important to you, and I don't blame people if it is, if you don't like being in your own company, then, you know, I'd be seeking to try and find an employer or railway company employer that does a lot of two-driver operation work, if that's your thing.
Which brings me to the recruiting process too, and I think you and I both worked in that process, of selecting drivers. And I don't know whether it's been your experience, but certainly in mine, where we've had to look and make sure that people are of the right personality type that way, because if they're not, it just generally doesn't seem to work. So that's something that I think people do need to consider when they're looking at a job like this.
Absolutely. Attitude is everything. Especially being a recruiting manager years ago, I looked for the attitude and whether somebody's trainable. If someone's got a bit of an attitude of, they kind of think they know everything already, or, you know, they're inflexible in being trained, then that is a huge red flag for most recruiters. My job, as I see it with pre-trainers, is to get people ready for that learning journey. And there is a heck of a lot to learn, depending, again, on which railway company you go to, which state, and the complexity of the network. So attitude is everything at the recruitment stage, and patience. Attitude and patience, because as you and I know, Steve, the old motto in the railway is a lot of hurry up and wait.
It certainly is. We're talking with Hamish Withington from Pre-Train, an organisation that takes people through the recruiting process should you want to join the railways and become a train driver, a career that I know many people are really interested in, so I hope this is helpful. In the meantime, here's the cars right here on the Clear Signal. You're listening to the Clear Signal with Steve Visscher, and Hamish Withington is with me from Pre-Train. We're talking about getting into the railways and driving trains. Hamish, let's talk a bit about what you would expect to learn when you go through the process. A lot of people have said, well, you just sit in there and you just press the button. That's not really the case. There's a lot to learn.
That old chestnut, it comes up a lot, doesn't it? I put a fair bit of effort into a couple of lessons about what I called it, I think it was the desirable attributes of a trainee driver, ideal or desirable attributes. And one of the things is I also went through a lot of myth busting. Some of the common ones, that old chestnut, it's just pushing a button. It's all automated now. The driver just is a bit of a figurehead who makes it start and go.
Perish the thought.
We've heard them all, you and I, and so have others. But for somebody who's, you know, like maybe even the way I set up Pre-Train was it was aimed at sort of younger people that are coming out of school and interested in building a career in the railways as a driver, and also the midlife people that are sort of maybe halfway or, you know, at a different stage through their careers that are considering either coming back to work after having children or changing careers from a professional or a corporate job and you know, following up on a childhood dream. So I've catered for everybody. But in saying that, look, the pushing button myth, look, that is anything further, nothing could be further from the truth than that. Yeah, there is some button pushing involved, but that's not the primary task. And the way I describe it, it's maintaining a high level of situational awareness, being able to understand where the front, the middle and the back of your train is, irrespective of its length and size. And also probably the key fundamental ideal attribute is the ability to learn the judgment of speed and distance. And factoring in the momentum of your train. I mean, if I was to condense it into one thing, I would say the number one thing is the ability to learn spatial awareness and to judge speed and distance. And I mean, if people are already driving a car, you're already kind of doing judging speed and distance. You know, you're anticipating other vehicles.
It's energy management. Yeah, energy.
Absolutely.
Yep.
And a very sort of respected trainer I had when I was younger, he said, as a train driver, you are a manager of forces. Yeah. Imagine you're towing a big rubber band with a fishing weight on the end of it. It's that same elasticity in trains. You know, of course, there's exceptions for your suburban trains and your diesel multiple units in the regions, but generally it's all about managing forces, judging speed and distance, and having very high level situational awareness at times where you could be expected, you'd normally drift off in your thoughts because, you know, you might be driving a train late at night on a big long section and there's not much going on. You can drift off, but it's in times like that things, as you know, as you and I both know, Steve, things go wrong and you've got to be able to very quickly come to understand what's going on and deal with it.
Which brings me to the other component of learning to be a train driver, which, of course, is the not inconsiderable amount of theory that you have to learn. There's a lot of theory that goes with this job.
Yeah. Look, I suppose your number one priority driving a train, is to keep it on the tracks and not derail, which is your knowledge of your speeds and your speed zones. But the biggest one, and I think the one I've been lived by that I've been really terrified of ever having happen, is going past a red signal. And that is the number one job of the train driver. And as you and I both know, we call that a SPAD, S-P-A-D, which is signal passed at danger. If we go past a red signal, and that's like the ultimate, I hate to use the term, but it's almost like the ultimate failure in your duties. If you go past a signal that's at your fault.
It's the ultimate bad day for a train driver. So learning to read signals and what they mean. And I suppose the other challenging thing to think about is that, despite logic suggesting this wouldn't be the case, signalling is different in every single state.
Yeah, Australia has been so parochial with its states. I mean, we couldn't even agree on a unified gauge to the width of our tracks to run nationally. It's quite ironic. And look, I've had the benefit now. I learned to drive trains in Queensland, which is a fairly simple colour light system on the main lines, and then we have a radio token style system on our medium use regional lines, a system called DTC, which is an exchange of number codes over the radio with a train controller. I've used the basic staff and ticket system, which is just having a metal token that says you own this piece of track. And of course, you know, I had some time in New South Wales and then in Victoria, and by far, Victoria has been the most complicated set of signalling systems to learn and understand, because in the railway, we all know that there's a bunch of rules for everything, and then there's always that exception. And that's the hard bit to keep up with. And Victoria is a very complex network. The signalling system in Victoria with the two coloured lights on every post pretty much, the amount of information you're getting out of those two different coloured lights is huge, and it is a lot harder. It's probably the highest standard of signalling to learn, so it does take a very long time. It's not just, green means go and red means stop. There's a whole bunch of different aspects that you need to know how to deal with, and rules to deal with when that signalling system has problems, because signals, just like trains and people, they're not infallible, and some days the signals have a bad day, and you've got to learn all the rules and procedures on how to deal with that on your own a lot of the time. Yep,
and the tolerances in exams are pretty slim. I know the pass mark for signalling exams here in Victoria is 95%, but they structure it in such a way that you've really got to get 100%. And I would assume that's the same anywhere you go in Australia. So all that sort of theory is something that people need to be aware that you're going to be in classroom for a long time before they even let you into a train.
That's right. This is the thing. So typically with pretty much fairly consistently across any railway company, there is after the recruitment and selection process and you secure a job with them as a trainee driver, there is a period of induction and theory in a classroom, which is done pretty much Monday to Friday, 8 to 5. Depending on the complexity of the network. I mean, in Queensland, when I started, I learnt one route which had one safe working system. It was only a 268 kilometre long route. We had one locomotive type and one wagon type effectively. So it was a very simplified, and it was an ideal training environment because of its simplicity. But you go somewhere like Melbourne or Sydney, and particularly Melbourne, you've got a couple of different safe working systems, but the signals in the field actually look the same. The more complex the routes, the number of routes, the more complex and diverse the network, the more diverse the amount of different rolling stock locomotives, EMU sets, things like that you've got to learn, the longer the theory component will take. So I think, when I did my theory, it took us about 3 months for a very, very basic system, and that was nearly 20 years ago now. But for somewhere really complex, you can probably expect to spend anywhere from 6 to 12 months, maybe 12 months in the classroom. I think some of the traineeships now for a complex network are around about 2 years before you can expect to be qualified, whereas others are still somewhere in that plus or minus 12-month mark.
So if people want to know, about how to get some preparation done before you go for the interview, taking in mind all the things we've talked about, of course, they can go to your website and we'll give that at the end of the interview, Hamish. But before we go, speaking of little simple rail lines, and perhaps not so simple, you've actually had quite a lot of experience driving on one of Australia's more iconic rail lines up there in far north Queensland, the Savannah Lander. So tell us about that operation and what it's like to operate there.
Look, the Savannah Lander, I say it's an enigma. It is an absolute enigma. It's been in existence now. It'll be 30 years next year in 2025 since the concept was born. So there'll be some big celebrations. But effectively, the Savannah Lander is a 2-car diesel rail motor. It's they were built in 1963, the 2 main units, with several rebuilds and repowers underneath. Between March and the beginning of March and the end of November every year, it does a full return trip from Cairns out to Forsyth, which is around about 420 kilometres southwest of Cairns. And it's a 4-day trip, round trip. So we do 2 days out, 2 days back. And it travels through, when we leave Cairns, we travel through the magnificent tropical rainforest through Kuranda. We head out onto the Atherton tablelands out through Mareeba on day one, and we get to a little tiny town called Almaden, which has got a population of about 17. At the end of day one, we get there about lunchtime. After lunch at probably one of the most classic outback pubs you're going to see in North Queensland at the Almaden Railway Hotel. Our passengers and guests, they typically get on a bus there and head up to Chillago for the night, and they explore the marvellous Chillago caves and the other beautiful quirky things all around Chillago. The next day, we all, start off again from Almaden. We head out right into the heart of the Savannah country. And the Savannah Way in Queensland is a 3,000-kilometre road that links Cairns right across the top end of Broome. So the Savannah country really kicks off once we get west of the Great Divide, out there near the other side of the tablelands. And day 2, we're heading off into that Savannah country.
Must be spectacular scenery. You must get a lot of tourists from overseas on that line.
No, surprisingly not, Steve. Our probably, I'm finished there now this year. As I said, I've moved off to other things, but the last 3 seasons I was there, 99% are domestic Australian passengers, and most of them, nearly all of them, are retirees. Quite often for some people it's a bit of a bucket list item because on day 2 we head out to the very end of the line at Forsyth, and that's home of the spectacular Cobbold Gorge, also celebrating their 30th anniversary this year. Beautiful big sandstone gorge in the middle of the outback, with little electric boats you can travel along in the water and see this magnificent ancient landscape. And of course, the other main sort of non-train attraction that people travel on the Savannah Lander to see is the Undara lava tubes there near Mount Surprise, which David Attenborough is apparently on record as saying they should have been listed as the 8th natural wonder of the world, these massive underground lava tubes. So the original concept was the train was another method to bring people to visit those outback attractions. But the train itself over the last 30 years and probably over the last 15, it itself has become a destination just to experience travelling through the outback in these 1960s rail motors with a couple of drivers who give it everything they've got when it comes to the commentary and the interpretation of what people are seeing outside the window in a very, very changing series of beautiful landscapes.
It would have to be one of the most unique train driving experiences that you could have in Australia. So there you have it, everything from driving freight around the countryside to doing suburban operations around major cities to even driving classic trains out in the outback. There's all sorts of roles there. So if people are interested, Hamish, they should do some preparation, and the best place to do that is at pretrain.teachable.com.
There's three different ways, three different sort of sets of lessons in it, Steve. Rail Ready is the first package, and it's a series of video presentation lessons where I prepare people for the realities of the industry. I suppose showing the benefits and drawbacks and the different sectors of the industry you can look at. The second course, the second package of lessons is called Fast Track. And that is we've decided I definitely want to pursue this career. Now I want to have a best chance at applying for and becoming a trainee. So I guess the preparation is stepping people through the typical, I love that word, the typical recruitment and selection process that people can expect from most railway companies. And then finally, the last package, I call it Mainline. The Mainline series of lessons now gives a bit of a light dusting overview of preparation for the learning process ahead of you. In the classroom, your learning process in your practical training out in the field, when you actually get your hands on a train with a driver trainer, the qualification process. So when you get your assessments, the qualification that you end up with, and just a handful, we finish off with a handful of wisdoms based on pitfalls and traps you can fall into based on 20 years of experience. So that's essentially the whole program in its entirety in those three set courses, but you can buy all three together and you get a discount.
Fantastic. It's certainly a worthwhile investment if you're looking at this. So once again, pretrain.teachable.com. Hamish Withington, it's been great to see you, mate, and thanks so much for joining us today.
Likewise, Steve. Thanks for the opportunity, and keep on keeping on.
Well, that brings us to the end of this week's program. Thanks to Hamish for his time, and also thanks to Anthea Palmer from Jimmy Hornet magazine. And of course, thanks to all of you for dropping by and spending some time with us. Until I speak to you next time, stay safe, have fun, and I'll talk to you again soon.
Get in touch. Join the conversation. Find us online at clearsignal.com.au.